Today is March 27th, 2014, and we are interviewing George Lewis at the Adams County Courthouse. Mr. Lewis is 83 years old, having been born on August 17th, 1930. My name is Emily Shireen Jones, and I'll be the interviewer. And Mr. Lewis, could you state for the recording what war and branch of service you served in?
I was not during wartime. I served in the United States Air Force.
And what was your rank?
Ended as a first lieutenant.
And where did you serve?
I served in Topeka, Kansas.
And did you have any mementos that you brought back home with you when you were done with your service?
No, I brought a lot of memories, but no mementos.
What was your job or your assignment?
I was the commanding officer of the procurement unit at the Topeka Air Force Depot, which was across the road from where I was assigned at the Forbes Air Force Base.
There was no combat in Topeka, correct?
Lots of combat. The governor had his problems at the State House, but no, we had no combat. But we did try to change that particular unit, and I think we were very successful in changing the unit that I was in charge of.
What do you mean by changing the unit?
Well, it was a procurement unit where we were buying what would be like hardware supplies for the Air Force, Army, and the Navy. They had consolidated a lot of the procurement and supply for all three of the military operations, and I was in charge of about 90 ladies who were typists and clerks, making contracts for bidding and purchasing of thousands of items of like hardware used for the services. And in that capacity, there were about 90 employees under me at the time, and my commanding officer, who was in charge of me, was an Air Force pilot who had finished his work as a pilot and was then, they didn't need pilots anymore, and he was assigned as a officer at the Topeka Air Force Depot in charge of supply and procurement. And he really had no background or knowledge about office procedures or contracts or procurement. And he had at the time when I arrived, there was a second lieutenant in charge of what I became in charge of. His name was Bill Matson. He was a very bright, brilliant civil engineer who came out of Procter Gamble, and was very moxie with computers. And of course, in those days, the computers were just beginning, but he had a lot of brilliance with respect to that, but he had no brilliance in working with people. All the employees, he would try to change a procedure or try to make things more efficient, and the ladies all got mad at him. And so when I got there, my boss, being a colonel, lieutenant colonel, former pilot, called me in and said things are just falling apart in the procurement department. Bill, he's great, he's brilliant, he wants to change things, make it more efficient, but there's just a revolution against him. And so I want you to take in charge of that. You listen to Bill, though. He's the one that will tell you what to do, and I, having no experience supervising anybody. So I all of a sudden am in charge of these 90 ladies. And I do listen to Bill Matson. And through the period of time, by following the efficiency and methods of setting standards for typists and ones working in my department that they'd never heard of and I'd never heard of. But he had set standards in Procter & Gamble when he was working there. And so he thought the Air Force should be able to set minimum standards for simple things like typing and clerking. So he was in charge of helping me do that. So we would have a standard set that a clerk at a minimum should be able to type so many words a minute and produce so many documents and contracts per hour. And we then recorded this, and if they didn't meet the standard, that was my job to decide what to do with the ill performers. And first, I learned that you can't terminate a civil servant without going through an awful lot of hearings and justification. But we reasoned that since we now, for the first time in that facility, had a record of performance of everybody, and those that were really at the bottom, we needed to either get rid of or do something. And so it was my job to work with them for them to realize that they were on the bubble. And of course, the civil service people would always warn us officers, well, you can't fire anybody because we will then take it up and we'll have hearings. So I reasoned we don't really want to fire them. We want to make them better. And so we would have times of having our best employees work with them and kind of retrain them on the job. We didn't fire anybody, but we also didn't replace. And when we didn't replace, we would hear from the local people in town, well, this is important. We need to have better employment in Topeka. And if you're not going to rehire people, we're going to lose jobs, etc. But I understood that, but at the same time, it seemed too bad to have such waste for the government. And by not rehiring and by not terminating the bad ones, but making sure if the bad ones quit, we didn't replace them. In the 2 years that I was there, we came down from 90 to just a little over 40. We actually were able to do more work with 40 people than was being done there with 90. I'd like to say that I give all the credit to this Second Lieutenant Bill Matson from P&G, Procter & Gamble. He was so highly regarded at Procter & Gamble that they paid him his full salary during the 2 years that he was in the Air Force, and then he also received his Air Force salary. I'd never heard of that before, and I was quite envious of that because at the time I was married and had two little children, about 2 years old and 4 years old. And I think my salary to start with was $235 a month. So Bill Matson, he didn't flaunt his income, but he and his wife were well off during the time. When I first went to the Air Force Depot, my first assignment was to go out in the grounds of the depot and to inspect the garbage cans. My commanding officer said that there was piles and piles and stacks of garbage cans that would have to be disposed of. And I said, well, why so many garbage cans? And he said, well, before you came, there was a mistake made on the procurement, and we were to procure 1,000, and there was a zero that was added, and there's 10,000 garbage cans out there, and you've got to get rid of them because it's an embarrassment to the depot. So I went out and I rode along the line, the roadway between the stacks of garbage cans, and I thought, well, we'll advertise them for sale. And I started to advertise them, and I assumed that they were garbage cans with lids. And before we let the contract, I went out to check, well, where are the lids? And there are no lids. The lids are gone. And my boss, commanding officer, said, well, we made a mistake there. Our procurement and supply department sent out bids for sale, but they just sold the lids. And the lids apparently were scrapped. And so I then accomplished getting rid of 10,000 garbage cans without lids. The Air Force Depot, we reasoned through Bill's brilliance that it was obsolete, that it really could be narrowed down to much, much more than we had narrowed it down. And at the time we left, Lieutenant Matson and myself left a paper recommending that the Air Force Depot be closed and that its functions be amalgamated or put in with other depots, and those depots could do what we were doing much more efficiently. And within about 3 years, the Air Force, after we left, the Air Force Depot was closed. So I didn't win any wars, and I didn't fight anybody except the system, and the result. I was very happy to at least have been a part of being able to show that the government at that place and the military was just totally beyond inefficiency, and that things could be done to change it.
Did you receive any awards or medals? Or
No, I don't think anybody awarded me anything. The award was the accomplishment in being able to narrow down the tremendous number of over surplus workers we had, and at the same time, I hated to hurt the employment figures of Kansas, Topeka. But that's the thing that always comes up throughout, trying to make government more efficient. At the same time, it doesn't add jobs often.
How did you get along with the officers and your fellow Air Force?
As I recall, there were 12 of us who were just out of college and who were, or law school. I was halfway through law school. We were 12 second lieutenants. We were very friendly with each other. Most were married. We would, for Thanksgiving, we my wife, who worked also at the depot, wanted turkey. And so for Thanksgiving, we all got together and had the turkey. And the gals all brought food, and we had a potluck. But we worked together very closely, and our main purpose, we had a unified purpose that we wanted to try to make things better than when we came. I think in almost every instance that worked out. We had one officer from St. Louis, I won't mention the name, but he was a son or grandson of a big funeral home business, and he could care less about what he did or whether he was sanctioned or not. But other than that, we worked very hard together, and there were ones who were in supply, just as I was in procurement with some other young officers. And together, we found some skullduggery where our higher officers were taking supplies out of the depot to build their own garage or remodel their own house. And when this was discovered, we all didn't know what to do. But fortunately, one of our young officers was from the office that was not responsible in this depot, but was responsible to his own commanding officer higher up. And he was like an auditor, and he reported what we reported to him of the skullduggery. And we all wondered if our higher officers would appreciate that, but we did know that because of this being reported independently, that all of the skullduggery stopped. I don't know that the one who did it was ever sanctioned, but it was kind of a detective operation that we performed. We decided we were there, we're going to do our best, and we were, if it was risky, we were going to do it anyway.
Did you feel any stress or anxiety in your job during that time?
Well, the stress, because I was then in a military operation for the first time in my life, and when we were doing these things, I had no idea what might happen as a result of reporting on people that were stealing, actually, who were higher officers than we. Maybe that was some stress. Working with these 90 employees, I enjoyed the experience. I never had anything like that before. And if it hadn't been for me having Lieutenant Madsen telling me what to do on the engineering part and the setting of standards, etc. Excuse me, I would have been lost. And I really enjoyed going through and finding that people could, when challenged, could do better, and that we could, as a group, could completely modernize this function that was so obsolete. At the time I went in, I had no idea it was so bad.
Did you keep a personal diary?
No.
You've told me about some of your memorable experiences. Are there others that spring to mind?
Well, it really didn't have much to do with the service. I was already 1.5 year out of law school, and that's why I was put in procurement. As a child, envisioned being a pilot, and that's my lifetime dream was to be a pilot, fly a plane and be a pilot. But when I went to the summer camp where we went through a rigorous training and then determination of where we would be assigned, at that time, uh, there was a total surplus of pilots. And so, having a year and a half of law school, I guess they thought I should be working in something having to do with law. So that's why I went to procurement. The entire time of 2 years in the Air Force, I never was the inside of an airplane. So from that standpoint, I didn't satisfy my lifetime dream, but I learned something much different than I ever thought I would.
How did you come to join the service in the middle of your law school career?
No, I actually started in ROTC when I was at the University of Illinois. That 2 years was required, and so I selected the Air Force because I wanted to be a pilot. Went through the 2 required years, and then I was then married, had 2 children, and decided that I should try to be a commissioned officer if I could, and went on 2 more years voluntarily in ROTC at University of Illinois, and then in a sense volunteered. I was never drafted, but volunteered for the 2 years of active duty, and that's how I got into the Air Force.
So your family was out there in Topeka with you.
Yes,
You said you had a wife and 2 kids at the time?
2 children.
And the rest of your family was back here in Illinois?
You mean my?
Your parents,
Oh
siblings,
yes,
or?
I grew up on a farm in Brown County, a little town of Hurstman, Illinois, and I have 9 brothers and sisters, and I was number 6, so the other boys had already been in the service. Then from the farm, I went to University of Illinois in agriculture, and then proceeded on in law school.
Were you able to stay in touch with your family during the time you were out in Kansas?
Oh yes.
Back in Illinois?
Yes.
Did you have leave that you were able to come back and visit?
We would come back for holidays. Sometimes some would come out and visit us.
One of the questions here is, what was the food like? I don't know if you want to answer that since you were living with your wife at the time.
In the summer camp, which was for a whole summer, and my wife and 2 children were back home, the food was terrible. But then, when I was in the service, then all of my food was at our trailer home. We had a trailer home that we lived in during law school and the service, and we ate quite well. I mean, Joanne was a good cook.
Now I get to ask you about your free time, how you entertained yourselves, and what you did on leave. Was there much to do out in Topeka?
There's not much to do in Topeka. How did we entertain ourselves? Well, I think I should add that that I wanted to try to get through law school as quickly as possible. And while in the service, I asked my commanding officer if I could find a law school, would it be all right if I might attend, a class or two a semester at night? And he said, that's quite all right, just as long as you do your work, and we don't care what you do. So I found a law school in Lawrence, Kansas University Law School, but that was about 40 miles away. And then I discovered the Washburn University Law School in Topeka, a little one-horse law school, and I could go there at night and maybe get one class each semester, and then I could get 4 classes while I was in the service, and that would take care of a semester. And so before I enrolled at Washburn Law School, I wanted to be sure that my credits would transfer back to Illinois. And I wrote the Dean of Law School at the University of Illinois, Dean Arno, who was there for many years and quite a distinguished law professor and dean. And I said, dear Dean, I found this one-horse law school out here in Topeka. I'd like to take a course or two a semester, and I'm permitted to do that. But I want to be sure my credits from this little one-horse school would transfer to Illinois. And he wrote back and he said, dear George, your credits damn well better transfer from Washington University Law School. I was dean there about 10 years ago. And so the courses that I took were from actually business people and lawyers in Topeka. Some of the best practical courses that I had taken during the entire time, and they all did transfer back to the University of Illinois.
So you didn't have a whole lot of free time. You were working
No,
and going to school.
Didn't have any free time.
Were there any pranks that were pulled during that time?
I can't think of any. We were all pretty businesslike.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
Yes. Just a day or two before, several of us were asked if we would re-up, and if we would, they would immediately give us the rank of captain. But since I hadn't finished law school, I certainly had no temptation of staying. I loved the experience I had there, but I needed to go back with the family and complete law school.
Were others discharged with you? You said there were other people.
Some of these 12 that came in with me left about the same time.
So you said you went back to law school. Was that right away?
Yes, immediately. In fact, I was discharged in August, went back to Champaign, Illinois, and they had just completed the building of new, adding to the old law school building, adding a new building almost identical to the old, and the grass had just been seeded, and so it was my job for a month to water the grass and keep it growing until fall, when I entered law school.
Did you use the GI Bill to get any of your education?
No.
Did you make any close friendships? You were talking about Bill.
Very, very close. In fact, we're still in communication with Bill Madsen and his wife. They live in Minneapolis, Minnesota now.
Are there any others from that time that you keep in touch with?
No, I don't think so.
Have you attended any reunions?
No, there would be such a small group of us that we haven't.
Uh, did you join a veterans organization?
I tried to. When I came back, I wanted to join the American Legion. And at that time, I was surprised to learn that in order to be a member of the American Legion, you had to have served outside the U.S. in some form of wartime. And so I didn't qualify for the American Legion, and would like to have been a part of it, but it didn't work.
Has anyone ever thanked you for serving your country?
Oh, every once in a while at a football game or some assembly, and then they do thank you and ask you if you're to rise if you're in the Air Force, the Navy, or the Army, or the whatever. And in that sense, I've always felt that I was rewarded for having served, and I never felt that there was any feeling, against those who did serve.
Has your military experience influenced the way you think about the military in general or war?
Yes, I think it has. It's a matter that when I was in the service, I felt that the compensation for those in the service was not nearly as great as it should have been. But at that time, of course, it was either draft or volunteer. And if you're drafted, you get paid whatever they want to pay you. And if you volunteer, you accept whatever they pay. But I felt for a long time that those who stay in and who serve as a career should be paid more. And as the years go by, that has occurred. And so my attitude towards adequate compensation for those who sacrifice almost their entire career, that they should be better compensated. And I think that has come about in later years.
Would you encourage young people to enlist today?
Yes, yes.
Well, I think we've kind of hit on this, but has your view of government changed before and after the service?
I think that I realized often the terrible inefficiencies of government, and I think that continues to this day. That it's very difficult for government to streamline and be really efficient, and that's a continuing challenge for all of military and government from way back then to the present time to the future.
What was the most positive thing you took away from your experience in the service?
I think the fact that many in the service are very diligent, very hardworking, unselfish, that we haven't appreciated the military ones who have really fought in the battles and have sacrificed not only sometimes their life, but their health and so forth. But today we still don't appreciate enough what they have done. I didn't do much, and I realized that I was just on the surface of serving, but I have a tremendous appreciation for those who have really done so much.
What was the most negative thing you took away from your experience?
That people can cheat, that they can commit skullduggery, that it's difficult to write things, that things, however, can be righted, and I think that's
Yeah.
the answer.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to include?
Well, I think you've done a good job of inquiring about, how little I've done in the service and how unimportant my time has been. But no, I can't think of anything else.
All right. Well, I will conclude the interview then. Thank you.